Are you an entrepreneur looking for more free time, more money, or just looking for that success blueprint? The Proven Entrepreneur is the podcast for you. Host Don Williams and his guests share real success stories from proven entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Don Williams.
Hey, Don Williams here with today's episode of the Proven Entrepreneur Show. I have a very good friend, an amazing entrepreneur with us today. He's the founder and CEO of Mutual Capital Alliance. Welcome, Mr. Rick Sapio.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Don.
Man, I am thrilled that you're here today. So let me take you all the way back to Little Rick. Okay, so 5 to 18. Okay, and I happen to know a little bit about you. So back in Jersey, okay, and in the house where you grew up, was there an adult who was an entrepreneur, who set an entrepreneurial example for you as a child?
Yeah, it was definitely my dad. He had 9 mouths to feed, so he was busy, and he taught me a lot about entrepreneurship and just rolling with the punches. He was in the car business of all things. And so there was always something to do at home, fixing engines, cleaning cars, changing tires, all of that. And I did it all from as young as I could remember. In fact, there's pictures of me at the age of 3 cleaning out trunks of cars. And he did a lot of volume, mostly in used cars.
Yeah, love that. And so was the car business his main thing or a side hustle?
No, it was his only business. The only thing he knew. He had a 6th grade education. He grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he didn't have a lot of options back in the day.
Yeah. Well, and the car business is one of those businesses where it's like bell to bell. You start early, you work late every day. And it's about the only way to make that deal go. So tell me about your first, I'll say job. Okay, so we're probably close enough in age. Like, so I mowed my parents' lawn, not because I got paid, because it was my job. But so not like those kind of jobs, but a job where somebody actually paid you, or maybe you had a lemonade stand. Maybe your first job, you were an entrepreneur. What was that?
Yeah, I was always looking to make money. So where I grew up, and they don't do that these days, but when it snowed out, we were excited because we knocked on doors with our shovels. When it was the fall, we knocked on doors with our rakes. But my first real job, I had to get up at 5 a.m., 7 days a week, rain or shine, sick or not sick, and deliver the New York Daily News to 200 people. And back then, which it doesn't exist anymore, only companies do it now. Yeah. But my mother, God bless her, when my dad got sick, I was 11, and he came home for dinner one day and he announced to the family that his back was hurting. So we went to the doctor, and on the first doctor visit, he was given 6 weeks to live. And my mother absolutely panicked and put all the kids to work. So my first, I would say, real job was 5 a.m. I would feel the sheets come off the bed. Sometimes it'd be freezing out. And I had to run outside. They would just drop a stack of 200 newspapers on the front lawn in a big plastic bag. And so I had to bring them in the house, fold them the correct way, put them in the plastic bag with a rubber band around it. And every house wanted it inside the door. And so I delivered it 7 days. And then on Fridays, I would collect.
So you literally had to go to every door, open the door, set the paper, close the door?
Yeah, well, open the door, between most houses had a screen door.
Yes.
Back in the day. So we put between the screen door because they didn't want it wet or whatever. Because, I started just throwing it on the lawn, but that was okay on the afternoon paper. I actually had 2 routes. I had the Bergen Record in the afternoon and the New York Daily News in the morning. But it was interesting. This would have been, I was born in 1963. So this would have been 75-ish, 74, 75, 76. And made really good money. I was probably making $60 a week between the 2 routes. And you learn about customer service. You learn about doing what you say. You can't miss a day. Like, it was impossible. Could you imagine kids today doing that? They would call that child abuse.
Certainly.
And it taught me everything I know about business. If you have a paper route That's all you need to know. It's all right there.
Yeah, and you got to go collect the money. You got to get
Hmm.
the money. So I had a good friend growing up. They had his father actually worked for the newspaper, but they had 12 children, 11 boys and a daughter. And so the basement, I grew up very modestly in Wichita, Kansas, and so small home. Their basement was built like a barracks, and all the boys lived in the basement in bunk beds, and so they were like, I don't know, 4 to 20 or something, and then the daughter lived upstairs with the parents. But like half of my buddy and half a dozen of his brothers, they were all minors, probably 6, 7, 8, up to 14, 15. They all had paper routes. Some of them had two, like you, and that was an everyday rain, snow, or shine. I don't know if the mail works, but the newspapers used to. And so that's awesome. Okay, so tell me a little bit. So I know you shared with us that your dad got a horrible diagnosis, and I know the story, but would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so he was given 6 weeks to live, and my mother panicked. We all went to work, and my dad, due to my aunt, who was an actress in Hollywood at the time, found a clinic in Mexico. My dad was rushed to this clinic, and he went on some experimental and natural cures for cancer. And his cancer actually went into remission for 2 years. And so it was during those 2 years that he almost knew he was going to die. And he taught us, look, you've got to learn independence. You've got to learn how to work. You've got to learn how to make money and bring it home. And so I think today parents spend so much time putting pillows under their kids' butts just in case their butt might hit the ground. Uh, I watched my dad over a 2.5 year period, go into remission. Then the cancer came back, and then he went from 220 pounds to 85 pounds when he died of bone cancer. And after that, he died when I was 13. My teenage years were not easy. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any financial support from anywhere. And yet, I fast forward and all my siblings got married. There's over 300 years of marriage between us and no divorces. And that's from a really tough upbringing. And so I think it's important that children experience adversity, experience really difficult times. And sadly, parents don't allow their children to do that these days. My wife and I are not like that. We've got a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old, and we do our best to let them experience life. So,
I applaud that. I know that with my own children, I tried to not be the parent who would put the pillow down because the reality is you learn, when things don't go well, and you probably learn more than when things are going, well for you.
well done. Yeah, I say to them all the time, there's no failure. There's either success or learning.
I love that.
Yeah.
I tell my clients, you either win or you learn, and learning is just a little slower winning.
Hmm.
Now, if you're not learning, that's another problem. But yeah, win or you learn. Okay, so tell me, you got through high school. Okay, you survived a challenging, at least economically, childhood. Brothers and sisters did, and so then you backpacked across Europe. You joined the Merchant
Well,
Marines. You went
yeah,
to
let me
university.
let me go back to when I was 11. I was 11 and the shit hit the fan, so to speak. My mother asked me to live with, of all things, the father of my oldest brother's future wife. So yeah, she didn't even know this guy that well. And she just panicked. She shipped the kids off. And so I lived with this guy for a summer when I was 11. It was after fourth or fifth grade. I can't remember. But he owned an engineering firm. And he basically said to me one day, sat me down and he said, look, you don't have much hope in your future with your dad sick and all that. But he said, I got an engineering degree. It opened up amazing doors for me. Let me show you my engineering firm. And I was blown away by what this guy did for a living. He lived a very comfortable life. And so he said, look, if you get an engineering degree, you could become a doctor or a lawyer, you could work on Wall Street, which is right across the river from where you live. You can, write your own course. And it never left me. So anytime after that meeting, somebody said, what do you want to do with your life? I would say, I don't know. But if I get an engineering degree, which I'm going to, I can become a doctor, a lawyer, I could be a business person, I could work on Wall Street, I could do whatever I want. And so as luck would have it, and there's always a little bit of luck that we have to take advantage of in life. I did well on my SAT math, and New Jersey gave scholarships to Rutgers University for students that did it well. They gave 10 scholarships, the highest 10 scores in New Jersey. And my older sibling said, just try to study really hard for your SAT, which I did. And I was given a scholarship for engineering at Rutgers. Lo and behold, how bizarre is that? And so it was brutally hard because I didn't go to a good high school. And I remember, getting to college and seeing all these people from China and India, and they knew what calculus was and physics and everything else. I had not experienced that. And so it was really hard. And so through college, the scholarship was only a partial scholarship, but I did get into the engineering program. I worked full time all through college. And as luck would have it, when I graduated in 1987, I was able to get a Wall Street job. And so, from the age of 11, it's really critical for adults to think about now how much influence they have. It could be one meeting. I only had one breakfast with this guy, by the way. I'm sorry, it was a lunch, but it was one meeting where he said, if I were you, this is what I would do. And so oftentimes we don't realize how much impact we have on other people. And so I'm really careful. In fact, today, as I speak to you, I had lunch with a guy who asked me to mentor him. And I was very careful what I said to him about his questions regarding career options.
Yeah, awesome. And certainly a little luck. Your mother asked you to go live with, I didn't follow the sisters.
No, so my oldest brother was about to get married.
Yeah.
And his future father-in-law said, hey, have him live with me for the summer. I could teach him a little bit.
Yeah. And what a great guy to step up and then to sprinkle a few really wise words in. And kudos to you for having an open mind, because I think most 10, 11-year-olds probably today certainly probably wouldn't to that conversation. And that got you started for sure. Okay, so tell us about the first business you started.
Well, the very first business was after the paper routes, because I wasn't making enough money. Me and my friend Chris Mason started a bicycle repair shop, and we took it really seriously. We made flyers, we passed it around, we bought bicycle parts from the junkyard, we made bikes, we fixed bikes. I did that for about 2 years. And then when I was 15, I started working on cars, which I grew up with. I probably bought and sold over 100 cars. I made a lot of money from 15 to probably 22, 23. But when I was in college early on, I discovered bartending, and I bartended for 5 years. Even after I got my first real job, I bartended almost 7 nights a week in New York City and North Jersey, making a lot of money. And so I'm fast forwarding a little bit. When I was 23, I bought 2 rental properties near the Rutgers campus and had 29 tenants. And I did something which they still do today. They didn't do it then, but I got these big houses and broke it up into rooms because I was handy. And I signed individual leases. What most of the landlords did back then is they would sign a group lease on a house. But I realized I could make far more money charging $200 a month per person rather than $1,000 for the whole house and trying to collect money from everybody. So if a person didn't sign or didn't pay for the lease, it was easier to eject one person rather than the whole lease. So that was fun. And so, I fast forwarded a little bit, but my first business was the bicycle repair shop.
Yeah. Well, and the college rental business, as you know, we both live in Dallas Fort Worth. It's very popular here, and so popular that the big cities like Dallas and Fort Worth are kind of boxing that in a little bit. They're putting a little more regulation on top of that. But you were a pioneer back then to rent by the room, with common areas being common. That was pretty amazing. Okay, so talk about your first business after college.
So I had read an article about Oprah Winfrey, how she, um, i- when she got her first job, she was an independent contractor. She wasn't a W-2 employee, so she started her company. So my first Wall Street job, I asked to be a 1099 employee and started my own company. So I was a consultant to the business, even though from everybody else's perspective at the company, I was an employee. And instead of earning a base salary and a commission, I asked to earn 50% of the revenue that I produced. So I worked for a firm in which we sold the the bonds of bankrupt public companies. And so everybody else was earning a salary and a bonus. I was earning 50% of revenue. And my very first year in that business, I generated over $1 million in revenue. So I was able to make more than a half a million. This is in the early 90s. So, right off the bat, I didn't want to be an employee. I always wanted to be a business owner. So my first real business was being a 1099 of a Wall Street firm, which was perfectly legal back in the day.
Yeah.
Um, I did that for about 6 years, and then I started my company, which I still work at now, called Mutual Capital Alliance, which was started as a holding company. And as it relates to being a holding company, we've spawned over 60 different businesses over the years by investing in various companies. And so it's been an incredible almost 30 years of making investments, uh, selling, merging, closing down, all kinds of different transactions over the years. I'm fast forwarding, but we've done a lot of different things as a holding company. And what's funny about that story is my first Wall Street job, every time I tried to open an account with somebody who was wealthy, because we sold the bonds of bankrupt companies to wealthy people, because we told the story of, if the bond goes through bankruptcy, bonds get converted to equity and the equity gets flushed to zero. So we did 14 deals when I started. But every time I opened an account with a wealthy person, my firm would say, well, we already have an account with that person. Or the CEO would say, well, I met him years ago, he's mine. And so I got sick of that. So I went west, and I would, fly into Chicago and whatnot and try to open accounts. But as luck would have it, before anybody who knew who he was in the late 80s, I met Warren Buffett, and he was actually a client for 6 years. But I was
Wow.
certain when I came back to the office that the firm would have him as a client. They didn't know who he was. He didn't become famous until, I think it was 1991, when Solomon Brothers went bankrupt, and he emerged as the largest shareholder. He became the CEO of Solomon Brothers. But before that, no one knew who he was. Well, he is the reason why I started Mutual Capital Alliance as a holding company. I didn't know a holding company from my backside, but he's like, if you're going to start a business, make it a holding company, because you can have one steady company, but you can buy and sell and create and have startups underneath it, which has served us well over the years.
That's awesome. So I did not know that part of your story. That's pretty amazing. I think that you're one of maybe the only person on the planet who has interviewed more than a couple billionaires.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Well, when 2008 hit, things got really scary for us. We were over leveraged in a lot of ways, and I got very nervous. And so my wife and I were sitting down one day. We have I'm all about rhythms. I call them liberating structures. So my wife and I have dinner every Monday night. We go on a date at 7:30. So it's freeing, and we haven't missed one since we met 18 years ago. And we're out to dinner, and I said, I don't know if we're going to get through this. And she said, well, why don't you meet people that have been through it? And so, as luck would have it, I was on the board of a charity, and we had signed up 6 billionaires to give away lunch So, you bid on having lunch with a billionaire, and it's pretty famous now, but Warren Buffett auctions off lunch once a year, and people pay like $1 million to have lunch with Warren Buffett. But in the case of this small local charity, it was, less than $500 to have lunch with T. Boone Pickett and Ross Perot and Phil Romano and yada, yada, yada. So I was able to have lunch with 6 of these billionaires that are local for less than $2,000. And it was fascinating. I became friends with all of them. And I went with the perspective of, how can I help you? Not how can you help me? And so it evolved, and they introduced me to more, and I ultimately got up to 44 billionaires. And what I realized is a lot of consistency among them in terms of clarity of purpose. The reason why when you approach somebody who's in your eyes, or we all put our pants on the same way in the morning, but if you think somebody's more successful than you, and you're afraid to ask them a question, the reason we all fear asking people that we deem more successful than us a question is because we know the answer is probably going to be no. And what I realized is they're so clear on what their values are and what their objectives are and what their purpose is, that they say no to almost everything. And I think all of us as human beings can learn from that. Most of us are addicted to yes. And, as soon as that screen lights up in the morning, we're just saying yes to everything that's coming at us, instead of the way these billionaires approach their life is they know what their lane is, they know what their values are, they know what their purpose is, which, by the way, all of us should know, should be
Yeah.
written down. And so I gained tremendous clarity from those 44 opportunities. And some of them, like I spent 6 weeks with Richard Branson, which is a long story, but I ended up creating this entrepreneurial event, in which we went to Necker Island, which is still going on today. That started in May of 2008. But I found these people to be so far more present when I was with them than anybody else. I never saw cell phones around, and it was never interrupted. You get their full presence. And I think it's because they just have learned how to live life fully.
I love that. So let me ask you, 44 interviews. Is there a book in there somewhere, Rick?
I don't know. I've been asked. I've made some speeches about it, but the reality was I didn't approach it from that perspective, and I feel like I would be breaking some confidences if I
Mm,
did that. But I will tell you that there was a tremendous amount of consistency among them. I could share some of the stories, but for example, they all had from a young age an accountability partner in the form of, we call it an assistant, but they elevated their assistant to rock star status. Like, you're in charge of my success. And a lot of regular people look down upon their assistant, but these people elevated their assistant, and many of them were with them for decades. And I became friendly with the assistant because the assistant was really good at deciding who gets to see the boss or not. Uh, but it changed my view on that. I call my assistant my accountability partner, not my assistant, because I don't even like that word. But I always judge people, maybe that's bad, if they go through assistants, they last for 3 months, and they don't treat them like an accountability partner. If you treat that person well, that allows you to achieve more and have more freedom.
And I think it's a really good yardstick of a person's character and integrity on how they do treat other people. And certainly, um, supposed subordinates as far as that goes. Okay, so fascinating. What about if I ask you to look back across your career for a hard lesson? So something that happened where at the time it was like, ugh, that hurt. But maybe today, in retrospect, it was actually the best thing that could have happened for you. Do you have a hard lesson you could share with us today?
So many lessons.
Hmm.
I've got this thing that I've actually written a book about it. The book is called Who's in Your Room? And basically every single problem that I have ever had, every single problem you've ever had, Don, every single problem that anybody who's listening ever had, started when you let someone or something into your life that didn't align with your values. every single time I've hired somebody, whether it's an attorney or an employee or a partner that didn't align with my values, I'm going to pay. Sometimes I'm going to pay big. Sometimes I'm going to pay really, really big, but I'm always going to pay. And sometimes I'm going to pay tomorrow, and sometimes I'm going to pay 30 years from now. But whenever we choose opportunity over values, we lose. And so I'll give you an example of that. You bring on a salesperson in your company, and your spouse or your team says, but they don't fit our values. And you say, but we're going to make so much money. It always bites you in the backside. And so I had gotten into a lawsuit, this is about 20 years ago now. And this smooth talking attorney said, I'm going to get you out of this lawsuit, no problem. And the lawsuit ended up costing the firm about $10 million. But the lawyer himself, he didn't align with any of my values. And he actually made the lawsuit into his reason that he became partner in his large New York-based firm. And so from the day I hired this lawyer, my team's going, he's not the right lawyer, not the right lawyer. So we had to fire this lawyer who cost us millions of dollars. And we ultimately hired a guy who charged us $50,000 to get the case dismissed. But man, it was 4 years of absolute hell. And that story plays out over and over and over. Every time I hire somebody or partner with somebody that doesn't fit, here's what happens, Don, and you know it. Your gut is screaming no. And the reason your gut is screaming no is because it doesn't align with your values. You know what gut stands for? God uttering truth. And your gut is saying yes, no. Your gut can only make yes, no decisions. Your brain can rationalize 1,000 different things.
Yeah.
And so I have learned, as much as I hate it now, to take the slower road, follow my gut, allow God to be in charge. And every time you try to do something or rush something or push something, I feel like in a sense I don't want to get too spiritual on people, but you're pushing God's will. You're trying to take over. And so I let things play out a lot more today than I did back then. I don't push as hard. But I see with, a good friend of mine, this is years ago now, he was walking down the aisle with his wife. And I said, Steve, are you going to stay married for life? Because as I told you, I just don't believe in divorce. I think if you don't believe in divorce, you're going to be really careful with who you marry.
Yeah.
But I said, are you going to be married for life? He goes, do you know how much money her dad has? And so I'm like, wow, that is horrible. So they ended up getting married, having 3 kids, and it was a disaster of 20 years. Horrible, horrible marriage. Now the kids are all messed up and everything else. Why? Because he chose opportunity in the form of her dad's money over values. And I was the last one by a mile to get married in my family. I got married at 42 and a half. I like to add that half.
And a half. There you go. So
because I had a list, and I said to my mother, I am not going to marry somebody that doesn't fit all these values. And she's like, you're crazy. Rip the damn list up. And then Melissa showed up, and we've got an absolute perfect situation for us. 4 kids now, and life is great.
love that. And so love what you said about gut. All my life I've tried to be very sensible, and I'm not the smartest guy in every room, but I'm the smartest guy in some rooms. And but the real magic for me in my business didn't happen until I started playing from my heart. Because my head, I can rationalize it any way you want it rationalized. But in my heart, I know yes and I know no. So thanks for sharing that.
But to your heart question, so your heart is where your purpose lives. And I think it's important. A lot of what we're talking about right now presupposes that you've done the hard work to discover what your purpose is and discover what your values are and live in alignment with them. And I think that we all need to do that work. Otherwise, we're just walking around in a dark room with the lights off, trying to figure out where the door is. And I would say the vast majority of us, Don, don't do that work, which is so sad to me.
I think the vast majority of people do not live with intention. They have not determined their values. They don't know their purpose. They don't know their mission. And life certainly gets, I don't, easier, more fulfilling, more content when you know the answers to those questions. No doubt. Okay, tell us about a warp speed moment. Things are going pretty good in your business, and all of a sudden, a couple of decisions, a couple of events, and you're on that hockey stick, and things are going to the stars. Do you have a warp speed moment you can share?
Yeah, of course. So I can say, it's funny. I'm in the process of selling a guy's business. He's the same age as me. He's 59, and I said to him, actually has my name too. I go, why are you selling, Rick? He goes, well, I'm 59. I'm about to be 60, and I'm going to pack it all in. And I'm like, well, that's really odd, because in the last 3 years, I've discovered what my hockey stick moment is, and I'm doing this for the next 20 years of my life. I don't plan on retiring. And so our holding company, we've got a money management firm, we've got an insurance business, we've got an exit business, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we've also got a lot of other holdings that we've developed over the last 3 decades. And the light bulb went off when I said, look, I'm perfectly suited to solve this massive problem in the world. The massive problem in the world is when an entrepreneur, and it's estimated that there'll be $10 trillion worth of exits in the next 10 years. When an entrepreneur decides to sell, what do? Like at that point, they know their business, but they don't know how to sell a business, just like they don't know how to build a building or build a house. If they were going to build a building or build a house, they would hire a general contractor. And so we decided to create this general contractor business for exits. We call it the Exit Concierge. And man, have we stumbled across something really big. We're not investment bankers or brokers or M&A advisors. We actually sit on the same side of the table as the seller. And just like a GC hires all the subcontractors, we hire the investment bank on behalf of the company. We hire the lawyer and have them operate at fixed fees. We hire the CPA that's going to work on the transaction. And because we've been working with these people for decades, the whole system is an ecosystem of a smooth transaction. And so what happens on behalf of the seller is they can go focus on running their business, hitting their objectives, and not having the sale interfere with their life. Typically what happens is they say, okay, I'm going to sell. And then they get in this whole area of business that they know nothing about. They get taken advantage of. They get charged. They're charged too much by the lawyers, the accountants, the investment banks. What we do is the exact opposite. We manage the process for them. And because we reduce the fees from all the vendors, it ends up costing the seller nothing for our services. And we call it the Exit Concierge. And it has been an incredible almost 3 years now of doing this. And we're scaling the business. And thank God that there's a lot of baby boomers that are not giving their business to their children. That's good and bad. But the fact that they're not, there's a lot of businesses for sale right now. And we think we can help a lot of people.
I think that's a great business, and have an exit. In my past, I didn't do everything as well as I could have, and I think that's very common with entrepreneurs. On a first exit, a year later, they're like, "Boy, I could have probably done this, this, and this better, and those 2 things I didn't need to do at all." And but sometimes entrepreneurs, because we're very good at something, that kind of bleeds over to where we think we're very good at other things, but we learn.
Yeah, just one interesting story on that. When you decide to sell your business, if you don't use an Exit Concierge, you're having to do the whole deal. So you're trying to run your business and go and sell your business. They're both extreme sports. But a friend of mine who I am in the middle of selling his business now, right after he signed the contract with us, he said, look, I've been planning a 3-week trip to Africa, and my wife will kill me if we can't go to Africa. And I said to him, not only can you go to Africa for 3 weeks in the middle of selling your business, but you're not allowed to call in or check your email or check your text. And the buyer said, I have never seen a seller 3 weeks before closing leave for 3 weeks. It's never happened before. And so, people don't realize when you try to sell your business, and since you've been through it, your life stops. And so we think we've given people an opportunity to not have that happen. And so I know we're onto something because the phone doesn't stop ringing.
Yeah. Well, the market speaks the truth. That we know. So, okay, what about a nugget? A nugget of wisdom from the mind of Rick Sapio that you could share with us today?
I think I mentioned it earlier, and if I didn't, I apologize, but there's this term that we throw around in our family a lot called liberating structure. And liberating structures are things that free up your time and your mind and allow things to happen naturally and on their own. They're almost like rhythmic things. So I mentioned an example of it before. My wife and I don't have to think about it. Every Monday night at 7:30, we go out to dinner. And the babysitter knows, the kids know, the employees know, the neighbors know, the restaurant even knows, because we typically go to one of two restaurants. And so it frees us up. It's not like other families where, honey, you want to go to dinner tonight? I don't know. We don't have a babysitter. What about tomorrow? I don't know. What about next week? I don't know. And months go by. Everything about my life is on a liberating structure. So when I work out, when I have date night every Tuesday night with one of my kids after family dinner, the times that we have 6 family dinners a week. So like even Monday night, I will go home, I'll sit down with the family from 6 to 7, then my wife and I will leave at 7:30. In my business, when we're selling a company, we put it on a rhythmic alignment weekly calls at the same time every week for 30 minutes. So you just eliminate all this chaos. Important relationships in my life, we're all on a rhythm. It could be once a month at the same time for an hour. It could be every week if it's an important relationship. And I think about it from a religious perspective. God says, look, Sunday's a day of rest. So we rest on Sundays. We don't do much, but God didn't say, it's whenever you want. He said it's every Sunday. And so we take that into our lives. And so I think liberating structure can release a lot of potential in human beings, because you get a lot more done when everything has its place. And so I know I'll probably drive a lot of people nuts with this, but I've got an engineering background, and I just think the precision around scheduling is liberating. And that's why it's called the liberating structure. It's a structure, but it's liberating. And I got to tell you, it took my wife a while to get used to it, but she's fully on board now. And with 4 young kids in the prime of their life, if we didn't have that, who knows what the heck would happen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you could certainly have some chaos there. Family with 4 children. Okay, so I'm going to put you in a time machine. I'm going to take you all the way back to 20-year-old Rick. And we got 60 or 120 seconds to give 20-year-old Rick a thought or two that would have helped you along your path.
Wow, that is a really good question. I'm sure everybody says the same thing, and I'm going to think about it. Um, I, it's funny. I've been one of these personalities that I always got elected the leader. And when I was 20, I was asked to be the president of my fraternity, and I did not know how to say no. And it wasn't until I was about 25 when I heard Warren Buffett say the difference between successful people and extremely successful people is that extremely successful people say no to almost everything. And so I go back to my 20-year-old self, and I remember I was way over my head with an engineering curriculum. I was taking, 21 credits, and my roommates were taking, economics and ping pong, and, it was crazy. And I was working full time. And I was, really active in the fraternity, which was crazy. And I remember my roommate said, you don't really sleep. And I got really, really, really sick. I almost died. The doctor said that all my numbers were so weird. It was really from stress. And to this day, I can't tell you what I had, but I collapsed and I was in the hospital for 10 days. And I think it was just complete exhaustion. And it was because I didn't realize that I could say no. And I think we live in a society today that people don't realize that they can say no. And to Warren Buffett's point, if you finish this quote, extremely successful people say no to almost everything. And they only say yes to things that fully align with their purpose fully align with their values, and fully align with their most important life objectives. Don, could you imagine how great life would be if we all lived that way?
It'd be amazing. Total clarity, and that clarity would be a liberating structure. It would be the filter for most decisions. And yeah, I love that. Rick, how can we support you? Anything we can do for you?
Man, I just love inspiring entrepreneurship in other people and inspiring people to, be the best version of themselves. If they know of a company that needs to exit, they could go to the website Mutual Capital Alliance, and they can send an email to that website. If they want to learn about values-based decision-making, they can purchase the book Who's in Your Room on Amazon, The Secret to Creating Your Best Life. And I want to thank my co-authors on that book. My 3 operating values, which I meant to share earlier, are simplicity, probability, and leverage. Keep things as simple as possible. Always do things that increase the probability of hitting the stated objective. So, as an example of that, if you want to increase the probability of having independent 18-year-olds, don't drive them around like a taxi driver their whole life. That's not going to create independence, from this sport to that sport or whatever. Help them start a business. And then lastly, leverage existing resources, existing relationships, existing technology, and life's a lot easier. So when I wrote my book, I called 2 best-selling authors that I didn't know, and I said, listen, you've already done best-selling books. Would you mind adding your name to my book and blasting it out to your list? And so Who's in Your Room became a bestseller using simplicity, probability, and leverage. So I wanted to share that nugget. But yeah, that would help them and help us if they bought the book.
Awesome. Love that. And there's another nugget in there. Don't be intimidated. Pick up the phone and call somebody and ask. The worst thing that can happen is they say no, and they might say yes.
You just made me think of something. A friend of mine, I met her kids, and they were like so full of life. And I go, what is going on with your kids? They were in their early 20s. And she said, it's funny, when they were 9, 10, and 11, 12-ish, we would go into a park, and I made them introduce themselves to 200 strangers every day. And I'm like, well, how'd you do that? She said, well, it took a lot. Don't get me wrong. It took a lot. There was a lot of temper tantrums. But imagine parents doing that with kids, that you've got to introduce yourself to 200 strangers in a day. So I've tried that with my kids. It's been really hard. So they're getting better at it, though.
Well, different time, different world. But if you want a PhD in humans, that'd be a good way to get started.
Absolutely.
For sure. Rick, I'm grateful. Thank you for being on the show today.
You're welcome, Don. It's been great.
That's today's episode of the Proven Entrepreneur Show. See you next time. Thanks. Bye.
That's today's episode of The Proven Entrepreneur. Go to ProvenEntrepreneurShow.com, subscribe to the show, leave an iTunes review, and you could win a $25,000 VIP day in Dallas with Don himself. And get Don's easier and faster selling with video course free. Please join Don on the next episode of The Proven Entrepreneur.